Hatman stood on the edge of a rooftop, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. Below, the city of New Orleans bustled with life, unaware of the darkness lurking in its alleys. The night was hot and humid, typical for the summer, but the Hatman didn't mind. He thrived in the night, especially in places like this, where history, mystery, and the supernatural collided in the tight, winding streets. New Orleans was a city full of secrets, and tonight, the Hatman was hunting one of the oldest. Rumors had reached his ears about an underground cult led by a vampire known as Lucien. This wasn't just any vampire. Lucien was a collector of ancient artifacts, and one of them was said to be a silver cross blessed by a saint, a relic that could supposedly destroy any vampire. The irony of Lucien possessing such an artifact wasn't lost on the Hatman. If the rumors were true, this would be the perfect trap. The Hatman adjusted his hat and leaped silently to the next rooftop, moving with the grace and speed that came with years of experience. He had been following leads all week, slowly closing in on Lucien's lair. The city's underbelly was a web of connections, and the Hatman had pulled every string to find the vampire's hiding place. His informants had pointed him to an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of the French Quarter. The mansion was a decaying relic of the past, with ivy-covered walls and shattered windows that looked out like the hollow eyes of a skull. It was the perfect place for a vampire to hide, a place where the past still lingered and the dead could walk unseen. The Hatman reached the mansion just as the moon peeked out from behind a cloud. The building loomed before him, a dark silhouette against the night sky. He approached the heavy wooden doors and pushed them open with a creak that echoed through the empty halls. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. He moved through the mansion like a shadow, his eyes scanning every corner, every flicker of movement. The Hatman knew Lucien was close. He could feel the vampire's presence, like a cold breath on the back of his neck as he entered a grand ballroom, its once opulent decor now faded and covered in cobwebs. At the far end of the room, a figure stood by a grand piano, playing a haunting melody that echoed through the empty space. The figure was tall and slender, dressed in an old-fashioned suit that was perfectly tailored. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "Lucien," the Hatman said, his voice calm and steady. The vampire turned slowly, his fingers still dancing across the piano keys. "So, you finally found me," Lucien replied, his voice smooth and cultured. "I've been expecting you." The Hatman stepped forward, his hand resting on the handle of the dagger at his belt. "I hear you have something that doesn't belong to you." Lucien smiled, revealing sharp, gleaming fangs. "Ah, the silver cross. Yes, I've heard it can destroy my kind. But you see, I've grown quite attached to it. It's a beautiful piece, don't you think?" The Hatman's eyes narrowed. "Where is it?" Lucien gestured to a small pedestal at the center of the room, where a silver cross rested, gleaming in the dim light. "It's yours, if you can take it." The Hatman didn't hesitate. He lunged at Lucien with the speed of a predator, drawing his dagger as he moved. But Lucien was fast, too fast. He sidestepped the attack with inhuman speed, his movements fluid and graceful. They circled each other, the tension in the air palpable. Lucien struck first, his hand darting out like a snake. The Hatman blocked the blow and retaliated with a punch that sent Lucien staggering back. But the vampire recovered quickly, his eyes glowing with rage. The Hatman didn't give him a chance to regain his footing. He moved in close, slashing with his dagger, each strike aimed at Lucien's heart. But the vampire was slippery, dodging and weaving, his movements almost a blur. Finally, the Hatman managed to land a blow. His dagger sliced across Lucien's chest, and the vampire let out a hiss of pain. Dark blood oozed from the wound, staining the floor. "You're good?" Lucien spat, his voice dripping with venom. "But you're only human. Let's test that theory," the Hatman replied. Before Lucien could react, the Hatman drew back and spat at him. The saliva hit Lucien's face, and the vampire screamed as his skin began to burn. Smoke rose from the wound, and Lucien staggered back, his hands clawing at his face in agony. The Hatman seized the moment. He lunged forward, plunging his dagger into Lucien's heart. The vampire's eyes widened in shock as he looked down at the blade protruding from his chest. His body began to tremble, and then, with a final gasp, he crumbled to ash. The Hatman stood over the pile of dust that had once been Lucien, his breathing steady. He wiped the blade of his dagger and sheathed it, then turned his attention to the silver cross. He walked over to the pedestal and picked up the relic. It was heavier than he expected, its surface cool to the touch. The Hatman examined it closely, noting the intricate designs etched into the metal. This was no ordinary cross. It was a weapon, a tool of destruction, and now it was in his hands. He slipped the cross into his coat pocket and walked out of the mansion. The night was still young, and there were more vampires out there, more dark creatures that needed to be dealt with. The Hatman knew his work was far from over. As he disappeared into the shadows of the city, the legend of the Hatman grew. In the dark corners of New Orleans, whispers of his name spread like wildfire, and the creatures of the night learned to fear the man in the wide-brimmed hat, because where the Hatman walked, death followed.